The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Lying is basically just acting, and I am a terrific actor.
You are a terrific actor.
It's not a lie if you believe it.
How old are you?
17. You complete me.
If you're just tuning in,
what you just heard was lie after lie after lie,
which are dubious at best.
Falsehoods told to the public, but
Everyone?
everywhere. The question is,
What is
the truth?
Well, let's find out then, shall we?
All right, hey, that's coming up next weekend, our brand new series, Truth Be Told, Extinguishing the Lies We Believe. And it's going to be Mother's Day weekend, which is a ton of fun because we are going to have Cheesecake Factory here on Saturday night next week. Bunch of cheesecakes from Cheesecake Factory, free after the service. We'll be enjoying that. And then we'll have this Mom's Day photo op. What a good looking family that is. And Sunday morning, we're having a breakfast. And if you've not had one of our turnover breakfasts, oh my goodness, because you're Saturday night folks, you probably don't come out on Sunday mornings to have the breakfast. It's something to write home about unless you're home already. But so that's all next weekend. We're going to have a few surprises going on too, so that'll be fun. But it's a great weekend to invite some people with you. Maybe invite some moms that you have like in your community or in your friend group, some family members, but really just invite neighbors and anyone around you because it's going to be a great weekend. And I'm really excited about this new series that we're kicking off next week. But today, as Lyle said, is part 3, the series finale of the Doubters Club. And we began this series saying that the world does not divide neatly between believers and unbelievers, like people who of faith and people of science, or people of faith and people of no faith, that in fact, we are all believers. We all believe something. In fact, we all believe some things, like many, many things we all hold in our minds, these mental maps or our ideas of the way things are, and we all live by implicit faith in our ideas about the way things are. Do not miss the series that we're kicking off next week. For many decades, for example, scientists believe something called the steady state theory of the universe. Some of you studied this in college or in high school. The steady state theory of the universe says the universe has always been as it is. It had no beginning, no origin, and no cause, and it has no end. It's just always been and always will be. This was an idea that actually traces its way back to Aristotle. And so the idea was statements like Genesis 1, like there was a beginning. These are quaint, antiquated, silly expressions of pre-modern man. But then in 1929, Edwin Hubble, and many of you know that name, especially from the telescope, the space telescope named after him, he observed through his telescope that the galaxies were actually speeding away from each other and rapidly, seemingly from a point of origin. Like if you reverse that trajectory, that they had all begun at a single point in time. And this was a very disruptive idea. It meant that the universe actually had a beginning, and it was disruptive to scientists like Albert Einstein, who was a steady state theorist. In fact, in 1931, Hubble actually drove Einstein up to Mount Wilson to his observatory to look through his telescope and see it for himself. Fascinating. You can Google it and discover more about that. And Einstein said, I was wrong. He realized that he had it wrong. And then in 1964, with the discovery of something called cosmic microwave background radiation by 2 American radio astronomers, confirmed for most scientists that the universe actually began at a single point, an idea that came to be known as the Big Bang Theory, which then led, of course, to the hit TV show, The Big Bang Theory, which for some of you is the most relevant thing that I've said so far. But it is now commonly held that the universe actually began. In fact, in a trillionth of a second, the universe exploded into existence in a flash of energy and light that contained all of the matter of the universe. Thank you, Einstein, for E equals MC squared, from an infinitely dense singularity about the size of a pebble. Now, exploded makes it sound rather chaotic, but this was extraordinarily precise. In fact, Stephen Hawking says, if the rate of expansion 1 second after the Big Bang had been smaller by even 1 part in 100,000 millions, it would have recollapsed, the universe would have recollapsed on itself before it reached its present size. On the other hand, if it had been greater by 1 part in a million, the universe would have expanded too quickly for the stars and the planets to form. In the beginning. Now, a lot has been written recently that suggests that the rise of the scientific method and the scientific discoveries that have been made and are being made, that all of this kind of renders ideas of faith or trust in God or the supernatural obsolete. And it kind of goes like this. Sometimes people will pose the issue like this. Well, in ancient times, when people didn't have science, they needed religion to explain things that they didn't understand. So they didn't understand diseases or neurological orders like epilepsy, and so they explained them in terms of spirits or demons or possession or something. And they didn't understand lightning or thunder or where that came from, so they would attribute that to some god like Zeus or Thor or Baal or something like that. But now, of course, we have meteorologists, so we don't need that anymore. Or they might ask, well, where do people come from? Where does life come from? And they would explain it in terms of the gods or the God. But now, of course, we know that 4 billion years ago or so, there were these amino acids in a pool somewhere on planet Earth that got charged by lightning, and they came together, and life began. And then that life divided and developed through natural selection and this random mutation to form everything that we see all around us. And the general idea goes like, well, religion was and is to this day, at its heart, the attempt to explain things by people who just don't know any better. It's sometimes referred to as the God of the gaps. The God of the gaps, that the God or the gods are called upon to explain what we don't understand, the gaps in our knowledge. And so it's like, what makes the sun rise, or what makes the seasons come and go? What is the moon? What causes our crops to grow or fail? Why does my child get sick? And the answer is, well, it's the gods or the spirits or demons or forces or powers beyond us. And that was understandable for them then, but now we have science, and now we can discover what causes things in the natural world, and therefore faith in God or trust or belief in the supernatural is obsolete. And therefore, faith and science, or faith and reason, faith and knowledge are often like pitted against each other, not just by people who are against faith, but often by people of faith themselves. And faith is often seen as like turning off your brain, right? Or checking your brain at the door. And sadly, there are many, many examples to substantiate that kind of idea. But in fact, as we said last week, faith and science are not in opposition to one another. Faith and science are not in opposition. Now, much of the supposed conflict, I personally believe, between faith and science comes often from either misunderstanding the science or misreading what the documents in the Bible are actually trying to say, like missing the point. So, for example, many centuries ago, scientists like Copernicus and Galileo said that the Earth actually revolves around the sun, a heliocentric or sun-centered model of our solar system, rather than the sun and the stars revolving around the Earth, an Earth-centered model, which had been the dominant scientific view and philosophical view for many, many centuries. That was another idea that traced itself back to Aristotle, so he's not doing too well in the ideas department. But among those who resisted this idea, and scientists and philosophers of all color, shapes and sizes did, but religious leaders also said, well, no, because the Bible says, and they quoted things like Psalm 104, the earth is set on its foundations, it cannot be moved, therefore the earth doesn't move, and your idea can't be true. Now, the problem was not that Psalm 104 was wrong. The problem was that Psalm 104, the intent of that psalm was being misunderstood, misrepresented, and misread. The point of Psalm 104, and you can read it for yourself, the point of Psalm 104 is not the immobility or unmovable nature of the earth, but rather the glory and goodness of God as seen in his creation, expressed in very poetic and, by the way, very pre-scientific language. And that misunderstanding of those of texts like that made it sound like the faith was being challenged by science, But it never was. It was not. Now, in our day, the greatest controversy between faith and science often revolves around these documents known as Genesis, and particularly the origin stories in this document known as Genesis. And I and many others believe that this too comes from a misreading of Genesis. Those opening stories, those origin stories are among some of the most profound writings in the history of literature. To this day, they are some of the most memorable stories ever told. Many of us could tell them after only hearing them once or twice, and in their day, these stories were revolutionary. They were completely unique. That opening line was written, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and the world was never the same again." But Genesis was written by a real person in a real historical and social context to a real audience to address real issues that were posing real threats in their day. And those issues were not about the Big Bang or the age of the earth or natural selection or Darwinian evolution. The threat in their day was the origin stories, the mental maps of the world all around them. Egyptian and Canaanite and Sumerian and Mesopotamian cultures all around them, they all had their stories. They all had stories. Some are sometimes referred to as their myths that try to make sense of the world, the way the world is, try to explain who we are and why we're here and where it all came from and where it's going and what it means, like the big questions. That's what these stories are written to explain. And in their stories, in all of them, there are many gods that are often at war with one another, violent stories of dominance and slaughter. In fact, the answers to many of their questions about why things happen often play out in terms of a war between the gods that is going on. In fact, creation, the physical world itself, was born out of the wreckage of one of these wars. In the famous Enuma Elish, some of you studied that in college or maybe even in high school, the Babylonian origin story. Babylon's Marduk, their chief deity, if you will, their version of like a Zeus or something like that, he rode into the battle of the gods on his twin steeds, Slaughter and Merciless. There's, I want to own those horses, like Slaughter and Merciless. Are you kidding me? And in this battle, he defeated the goddess Tiamat, the primordial dragon, the ancient dragon, the goddess of chaos and the oceans and the deep, by shooting an arrow down her open mouth, and then he gutted her, and I quote, splitting her open like a mussel, Mussel, in two parts, and he created the heavens with the waters above and the earth with her upper half, and then the earth with her lower half. And again, I quote, putting her head into position, he thereon formed the mountains, opening the deep which was in flood, he caused to flow through her eyes the Euphrates and the Tigris. Sunday school was exciting for Babylonian students, for kids. Like, do not miss next week. What's going to happen next? And then a full 6 tablets in, human beings finally enter the story. It goes like this. Some lesser gods were complaining because they were sick of having to do all of the work. They're complaining to Marduk, and so Marduk says, I will establish a savage. Man shall be his name. Savage man I will create, and upon him shall the services of the gods be imposed, that they might be at ease. And so he kills one of the gods that nobody likes and mixes his blood with the clay in the ground and makes man. In other words, man is a total afterthought in the story, never really intended to be that way, created to be slaves. And people have no rights, they have no value, at least they definitely have no intrinsic value, they have no purpose, no meaning, no hope, and these were the stories that formed their mental maps. These were the stories that they lived in and lived out, and their world was a fearful, unpredictable world of spirits and gods and forces that always seemed to be at odds with them, but they could never really know why or what they had done to cause it. And so they did everything they could to try to appease the gods and tilt things in their favor and maybe gain a little bit of control in an unpredictable and unsafe, uncertain world. They would give their adolescent girls and boys to the temples to be prostitutes in order to ensure the fertility of their soils and crops. They offered sacrifices, the costlier, the better. And of course, what is more costly than a human being themselves? And what is more costly to you than the life of your own child? And their lives were filled with fear and futility and insignificance and uncertainty and violence. And into that world, Genesis brings the most revolutionary ideas, utterly unique in the ancient world. This came out of nowhere and dropped like a bomb in the ancient world. There is one God, and that God created the heavens and the earth, created it not out of like accidentally or violently, but with care and wisdom and precision and goodness. And creation is good. It is not to be feared. It is good, but it is not God. And God does not exist within creation. And human beings in particular, they are unique and they are created in the image of God. And these are the ideas that flow out of the opening stories of Genesis. Revolutionary in their day and becoming revolutionary again in ours. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. But immediately, there's a problem. There's chaos and darkness and desolation. By the way, a problem that all of these ancient stories began with. These stories that we find in the document known as Genesis, these stories are taking the language of all of the stories around them and reshaping them, repurposing them, if you will, in an entirely different way. This was the problem that exists in all of these stories. The earth is formless and empty. Formless and empty, no developed order and no life, and darkness is over the surface of the deep, the sea, the deep, the ocean, that symbol of chaos. But this is no dragon Tiamat to be slain, and the ocean is nothing to be feared. It's simply a created thing, and the presence of the Spirit of God is hovering over the deep. The 6 creative days that follow tell the story of God creating beauty out of chaos, light out of darkness, this wonderful, well-ordered home out of this watery miasmal soup, if you will. But more than that, God does it in this beautiful pattern of harmony and wisdom. So check out this chart of the creative days, the 6 creative days of Genesis. And as we reflect just briefly, we don't have time to deep dive into the story. That'll be fun to do so, and one of these days we will. As we reflect on the flow of the story and see the master designer at work, note the symmetry and the order to just the way the story is told. Days 1 through 3 provide the basic divisions, if you will, the order necessary for life to thrive on God's planet. In the broadest strokes, this is a story so simply told that a child can follow it along, and with this beautiful depth of poetry that Hebrew scholars note is not quite prose. It's like this semi-poetic language. And day 1, into the formlessness, God speaks light. That famous line, "Let there be light." And the darkness is dispelled and separated. That is a key word in the first 3 days, limited to only a part of the day, and things are named. And the naming is important too throughout the story, because naming is a function of ordering things. And in their culture, it is an implicit statement of God's authority over these things, his power over them. Things are separated, things are named, and it is good. Then in day 2, the watery chaos, the deep, the ocean, is spoken to. There's no war, there's no battle, there's no gutting, it's just spoken to. And it obeys, and it's separated, and God says sky, and there are limits and boundaries drawn, and things are named, and God says, that is good. And then in day 3, the sea is even further separated, and again, boundaries are drawn, and God says land, and then he speaks again. And on days 3 and day 6, They mirror each other in so many ways, one of which is there are two creative acts happening on both of those days. And on day 3, a second creative act happens as God speaks again and plants. Now, for the first time, life, living things enter the story. A great barrier is leapt over from non-living to living things. He calls plants forward. Everything is named, and God says it's like, once again, it's good. So by the end of day 3, the earth is no longer formless, but it's still empty. And so days 4 through 6 begin to fill these divisions of light and dark and sea and land and sky. Again, with God just creating and calling things forth. So day 4 returns to the subject of light and dark. But this time, God in particular creates specific lights. Specific lights are created, a greater light to govern the day and a lesser light to govern the night. Now, here's another one of these clues in the story that it's not intended to be taken literally or linearly. Check out day 4. Here's what happens day 4. And God said, let there be, day 4, there it is, Genesis. There it is. God says, let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day and the night. And God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day and the lesser light to govern the night. And he also made the stars, and there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. A great light to govern the day. Anybody know what we call that great light? Anyone want to take a wild guess? That would be the sun. Yeah, that would be the sun. Anybody remember what got created on day 1? Light, like day and night got created. Now, even in the ancient world, people were pretty well aware that the sun had something to do with this whole cycle of daylight and night. And if the writer was intending for this to be taken literally or linearly, he would have a really good reason at this point to get upset with his editor. Like, seriously, bro, you didn't catch that? Sun on day 4? Like, help me out. You're making me look bad here. But it was not written to be taken that way. Day 5 answers back to day 2 as birds and sea creatures are created. God says, reproduce and fill the sea and the sky. And then on day 6, once again, 2 creative acts as animals and insects are created to fill and populate and multiply, fill the land. And then he speaks again a second time. And human life is called forth. Human beings are created in the image of God to fill and govern and rule over everything that God has created. And by the end of day 6, the earth is no longer formless and empty. It is filled with life and vibrancy and order and light and beauty. And God takes it all in and he says, that is very good. And then day 7 is this unparalleled day where God sets up a pattern for all of us, a pattern of work and rest and enjoyment. And all of it is very intentional. Even the way the story is told, very personal, very orderly and creative and careful. And all of it is in direct contrast to the stories and the ideas of the people all around them. This is a whole new story and a whole new vision. A whole new vision for who we are and why we're here and why everything else is around us and what we're supposed to be doing here. And it's using the language of the current worldviews around them to challenge and correct those worldviews. In other words, the point of the story is something so much bigger than a linear or sequential cosmological account of how matter and life came into existence on this planet. The point, in my opinion, is not 6 24-hour literal linear days or the age of the earth. The point of the story is, don't worship the sun. Don't worship the moon, and don't look at the stars to guide your life or to guide your fate. They are good, but they are not God. Do not live in fear of creation. You were created to rule over and care for and protect creation, not to live in fear of it. And do not ever, ever underestimate the nobility and the glory and the dignity of being human or the humanity of every single person you will ever meet. In fact, far from being in opposition to or incompatible with science, it is precisely, as we said last week, Genesis' understanding of creation having unity and order and rationality that actually laid the foundation for the entire scientific enterprise of the modern era. In fact, Rodney Stark, a sociologist and historian, a scholar, puts it this way. It was precisely their worldview, a worldview that saw nature as the product of a rational God, and therefore saw that to explore nature and with the expectation of finding unity and order as a way to know and glorify that God made sense. Faith and science are not in opposition. In fact, I believe understanding creation, understanding nature, understanding science can grow a healthier and humbler faith. Faith and science are not in opposition. In fact, understanding nature, understanding the physical world, as Stark puts it, as a way of knowing and glorifying God, is a way of growing a healthier, humbler faith. And all of the scientists who began the whole modern scientific enterprise believed that to be true. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been somewhere, maybe lately, or maybe in the last few years or something, where you could just see a lot of stars? I mean, obviously not here. This doesn't happen in Southern California. But have you ever been somewhere where you could see a lot of stars? A few of you are nodding your head. I moved from California, or to California from Florida, a number of years ago, packed up my car to drive across the country, got a buddy to come with me, bought him a ticket from LAX back to Sarasota, Florida, where we are from, and we loaded up my car with all of my stuff, which wasn't really very much at all, to drive across the country, and our intention was that we were going to take a week to do it. We were just going to go slow, and we were going to see all of the points of interest and just like an adventure and like stop in cities and hang out and like biggest ball of yarn. I mean, like we were going to make a thing out of this. But something happened. I still to this day can't explain it. When we got behind the wheel, I think it's a malfunction in the Y chromosome, but we got behind the wheel and we just started driving. Like just drive and not stopping at all because we're making great time, right? And so we drove for 24 hours straight. Like just drove for 24 hours straight. Finally, we stopped in like the most uninteresting place a person can stop, Oklahoma, and we got a cheap motel. We both crashed. We slept for about 12 hours. We got back in the car that afternoon of the second day and just started driving again. And it was the middle of the night. I'll never forget it. The middle of the night, like 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, we're driving through the desert in Arizona, and we became aware of this phenomenon happening outside of our car. And we're like rubbernecking and looking. It was stars. Billions and billions of stars, a night sky unlike anything I had ever seen before. And eventually we just pulled the car over. We just stopped, we pulled the car over, and we got out of the car and we laid on our backs in the Arizona sand and just stared at the stars for like a half an hour, hardly saying a word, just awestruck. And the darkness seemed to make the stars pop out to us. It almost felt like I kept reaching up because it seemed like I could touch them, like one of those 3D movie things, even though you know you can't. It's like, it just feels like it's right there, even though it's trillions of miles away. Have you ever had a moment like that, staring at the night sky? And if you have, you could probably relate to this weird kind of experience of it being, on the one hand, so humbling, feeling so incredibly small, and at the same time, really rather uplifting and elevating. Psalm 19 says, "The heavens declare the glory of God." They aren't just up there, those stars aren't up there just twinkling, twinkle, twinkle, a little star. They are saying something to us. They're trying to tell us something about the glory, or the Hebrew word for glory is kavod. It's the word for heaviness or weight, the gravitas of God, his greatness, his bigness. They are declaring the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day, they pour forth speech. Night after night, they tell us what they know. And what they tell us is that the universe is a big place. Astronomers don't actually even know how big it is. The estimated known universe, which is the phrase they use because we're always building a bigger telescope that can see further than we've ever seen before. But right now, the estimated known universe is something like 93 billion light years across, keeping in mind that a light year is 5.87 trillion miles long. Now, give a little context to this, what this looks like. The sun, our sun, is 93 million miles away, or 8 light minutes. Light traveling at 186,000 miles per second. So what that means is a particle of light leaving the sun's surface, traveling at 186,000 miles per second, reaches your skin in about 8 minutes while you lay out on Laguna Beach. 14 hours later, that light particle has just left our solar system. And it will travel, again, at 186,000 miles per second for another 4.25, 4 years and 3 months, 4.25 years before it reaches the next star to us, our closest neighbor, Proxima Centauri, which is only one of over 300 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. In other words, if you were to attempt to count the stars in just our galaxy, just our tiny little subdivision of the universe, at the rate of 1 star per second, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it would take you 2,500 years to count them all. And the prophet Isaiah says, "To whom will you compare me? To whom will you compare me? Or who is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name because of his great power and mighty strength. Not one of them is missing." And God is saying, you need to right size your view of me. Now, back to our Milky Way galaxy, just to gain a sense of proportion of this right here, this image. If you were to scale this image, just imagine this, if you were to be able to drag the corners and scale this image to the size of the North American continent. So it'd be very pixelated at that point, right? But if you could scale this out, lay it flat across the size of the American continent, our solar system would be about the size of a quarter dropped somewhere in the New Mexico sand, and our planet, a speck of sand on that quarter. So a particle of light has left our sun at 186,000 miles per second. It hit us in 8 minutes. It left our solar system in 14 hours. It hit the next star in 4.25 years. 100,000 years later, that particle of light will be leaving our galaxy. And it will travel for another 2.5 million years before it reaches the next galaxy to us, Andromeda, which is just one of 100 or hundreds of billions of galaxies in our known universe. One more image for you. It's called an ultra deep field. This image was taken by that Hubble Space Telescope, revealing tens of thousands of not stars, but galaxies. Tens of thousands of galaxies, some of them 13 billion light years away from us. And to gain a little perspective, here's what I want you to do. This is a play along moment. And keep in mind, there's no fourth wall. I can see you. Okay, so here we go. I want you to do me a favor and hold out your thumb at arm's length towards this image somewhere on the stage. Just look at the image. Hold your thumb out. This entire image resides in an area in the night sky smaller than your thumbnail as you hold it up at arm's length just over the Big Dipper tonight. Tens of thousands of galaxies just right there in the night sky. To whom will you compare me? To whom will you compare me? Who is my equal? Where are the analogies that you're going to draw to try to make sense of me, says the Holy One? Look at the heavens. Lift up your eyes. Understanding creation. Understanding creation has the effect of right-sizing our views of God and of ourselves. He is not our size. He is not our peer. He does not have a 3-pound brain like we have, and he does not think like we think. In fact, the prophet Isaiah goes on to say, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth," and we still don't know how high that is. As the heavens are higher than the earth, So my ways are higher than your ways, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. And many of the faith struggles that you and I have, I think, are small God struggles. Little g God struggle. Bodyguard God, come on. Vending machine God, boyfriend God, guilt God, anti-science God, little g God struggles. And as we begin to discover and understand nature and creation, we grow a healthier and a humbler and frankly, a more honest faith. And that's true not just of cosmology or astronomy. It's true, we went big. You could go the other direction to microbiology. I mean, the intricacies of the cell alone are humbling and amazing. Or anatomy, or brain science, which is one of the most fascinating fields of science to me, or quantum physics, which is fascinating too, even though I cannot understand it at all. But truth, understanding compels us to be healthier and humbler. And when from time to time we actually get to fill in one of the gaps with our little 3-pound brains and figure out how God actually did something or how it works, we don't make God smaller. We make him bigger. We glorify God. In fact, Henry Schaefer, who is the professor of chemistry, and he's the director for the Center of Computational Quantum Chemistry, which is fun to say. I have no idea what that means. It's fun to say, though. Computational quantum chemistry, he says this: the significance and joy of my science comes in those occasional moments of discovering something new and saying to myself, so that's how God did it. So that's how God did it. Faith and science, faith and knowledge, faith and reason are not in opposition to one another. In fact, understanding creation can grow a healthier and a more honest and a humbler faith. The universe puts this exclamation point on Isaiah's words: my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. Of course not. Of course they aren't. How could we even presume or begin to think that they might be? A being capable of creating all that we can see and all that we cannot see and have not yet seen, to speak light and in a flash, an intricately precise flash, all that is begins. In the vapor of your breath, the planets form. And with it, the laws of gravity, the strong and weak nuclear force, the makings of DNA, all fixed in that moment, that trillionth of a second, and set in motion, evolving in pursuit of what you said. This being, this one who has the power, the wisdom, the intellect, the love, the goodness to say such a thing, and in saying it, make it so. This ultimate reality, this obliterates all of our little g gods. Guilt God and boyfriend God and bodyguard God and vending machine God and American nationalism God, ethnocentric God. How dare we? Who do we think we are? Liberal Western democracy God, anti-women God, on and on and on, including, by the way, Richard Hawkins' flying spaghetti God. It just obliterates all of our little g gods, all of the gods that we have created in our own image and attempt to hold onto by a string. If it is possible, if it is possibly true that this being is the beginning and bedrock of all reality, and then take a greater leap than that he, and the pronoun he at times just feels so inadequate and inappropriate to refer to such a being, but using it as we do, that this being made all human beings in his own image to reflect his dignity and his glory and his nobility to each other and to the world. The truth of that origin story, if and when I would ever let it rearrange the landscape of my mental maps, that would change everything about how I live, how I feel, what I value. And the real question for us, the real question is not, do I believe that? Do I believe that Do I believe that this is true? The real crux of faith, the real questions of faith are never believe that or believe about questions. What do you believe that or what do you believe about? There is far more than sufficient evidence to believe that there is such a one. Faith, by the way, is not, we said in week 1, the mental leaps we make over our gaps of knowledge and reason. And we have made faith into that. And we have diminished faith into something that it is not. Faith is not what we do when we can't know. Because I can't know, I guess I just have to believe. That's why we give Sunday school answers to grown-up questions. That is not what faith really is. The real crux of faith is not believe that, but believe in. Believe in. It's a phrase that the first followers of Jesus, to my best understanding, actually coined. That they had brought two Greek words together that had not actually been brought together before they started writing this phrase. Two Greek words, pisteuo and eis. Pisteuo is the verb for believe, and eis is the preposition that would normally be translated into. It has more of a sense of movement than just location, but we translate these two words, believe in. For example, for God so loved this world that he gave his one and only, or his unique son. It was a phrase that John had to use because in their world, there was another son of God, and he was the emperor of the Roman Empire. But this son of God is not like that son of God. And God so loved the world that he gave his one and only, or his uniquely begotten son, that whoever, what's said next? Believes in. Believes in, not believes that. Do you believe that God loved the world that much? That's not actually the question. The question is, do you believe in? Do you believe in? Will you entrust yourself? Will you trust in that? Will you put the weight of your life in that? It's like the first 3 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, the 12 steps. It's like 3, and some of you are very familiar with the 12 steps. The first step is such a big step. It's that I admit that I'm powerless, that I can't just manage my way out of this hole that I've dug myself into. And that is such a huge and important realization to come to. And then the second step is that I come to believe that. I come to believe that a power that's actually greater than me can restore me to sanity, can make me whole again, can restore me to who I'm created to be. Now that is a big step. It is a hopeful step, but it is not the most important step. The rubber meets the road with the third step. I make a decision to turn over, to entrust, to surrender my will and my life to this God as I am coming to understand him. And that's the meaning of trust in. That's what believe in really refers to. I entrust myself to the truth of this. And I can have more than enough evidence. I can have more. This is no blind faith that we're leaping into. And the personal testimony of many, many others witnesses to the fact, as Jesus called his first followers. But the real question, the rubber to the road question is always, will I surrender my will and my life to the care of God as I am coming to understand him? Not on a whim, not flippantly, but truly and seriously to say, Creator God. And if we dare use the phrase that Jesus taught us to say, can this even be true? Heavenly Father. Heavenly Father, I surrender all that I am, all that I've been, my past, my stains, my shame, my triumphs, my victories, all that I am, all that I've been, all that I want, all that I will be. I surrender it to you. Here's my life. Here's my life. It's yours. Not because all of my questions have been answered. If you're like me, they never will be. I'll be asking them till I die and probably figuring out a whole bunch of stuff for the next many, many millennia. I'll continue to question. I'll continue to wonder. I will continue to wrestle, believing that a bigger and broader knowledge and understanding gets me to a healthier and a humbler and a more honest faith. But I don't have to know everything to know something. And I make this decision today. I surrender. I believe in. And I thought maybe there'd be no better way to end a series like we've been in for the last few weeks than to give you a chance to do that. If that's where you're at in the journey right now, and you might be saying, I still got a whole lot more questions, and I hope you'll come back next week and continue to ask those questions. But maybe this is where you're at right now. And you could get 100 more answers, and it would never get you to that place of saying, I believe in. I surrender my will and my life to the care of God as I'm coming to understand him. And so I want to give us all just an opportunity to pause in prayer. And I'm going to pray this prayer right here that's on the screen. And as I pray it, I just invite you to say it after me, like in your own mind, in your own head, as we close in prayer tonight. Will you bow your head and maybe just carve out your own little moment here with me? And then just as I pray this, make this your prayer. Creator God. Just say that in your own mind, your own heart. Heavenly Father, here is my life. Here is my life. I surrender all that I am, all that I've been, all that I want, and all that I will be. I surrender it to you. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, hey, thanks again so much for joining us today and being a part of this 3-week series. If you caught all of them, if you missed any, you can watch and you can share online. And in fact, if you got something out of tonight, maybe you want to share this with someone else. On our YouTube channel, you can type in just Our Terra Nova, or you can go to the web address as it is. And if you subscribe, then it'll always be coming up in your feed. So that's kind of fun. And maybe if you got something out of this, maybe you think, hey, I want to invite somebody back next week. Don't forget, it's Mother's Day weekend. It's going to be a ton of fun. On Saturday night, we're going to be enjoying that Cheesecake Factory, so cheesecake after the service, so that is going to be great. And then, of course, kicking off our brand new series, Truth Be Told. Next to you, you might have one of these cards, Liar, Liar, Pants On Fire. You got that. And so grab one of these on your way out. Keep it with you this week. Maybe you bump into somebody, invite them to come back with you next week, because it's going to be a lot of fun kicking off this new series. On your way out, by the way, don't forget, Lyle mentioned those Connect cards to you earlier. If you tore it out and started to fill it out and maybe kind of got a little distracted, love to hear from you. So take a second and finish letting us know at least as much about yourself as you feel comfortable letting us know if you want to fill that out. And you can drop those Connect cards in the baskets on your way out. There will be somebody standing at the door. You can just drop that in the basket. Of course, you can drop offering envelopes in the basket as well. And you can both fill out a Connect card and give online and on our Terra Nova app too. And then while you're out in the lobby, please stop by our Kids Feeding Kids table. You can get a lot more information. You can donate there. We're raising $20,000. It's going to be a lot of fun, and this is a generous community, so I know we'll be able to do that. And then you can sign up to serve on one of the serve side times, or both of them if you care to, and you can actually grab some Kids Feeding Kids cards there to think about, I'm going to invite this group of people, and so you can take those with you as well. So stop by that Kids Feeding Kids table on your way out too, and then we'll see you back next weekend as we kick off our brand new series, Truth Be Told. God bless you guys. Have a fantastic week. See you back next weekend.